A 1999 released caper film both produced by and starring a Bond actor as a talented art thief being investigated by a sexy lady working in insurance, comprised of several elaborate fun heist sequences and a simmering, frothing, intoxicating romance between the pair. Well, I'll take two, thank you very much. Good evening, high-end robbery fans. This is a review of the Sean Connery, Catherine Zeta-Jones starring film Entrapment, but I did want to acknowledge the strange similarities that this film has with the Pierce Brosnan, Rene Russo starring film The Thomas Crown Affair. I'd never seen Entrapment before, but all the way through I was thinking about The Thomas Crown Affair and just how I cannot believe that these two films were released within months of each other. I guess this is kind of the same thing as what happened with the likes of Independence Day and Mars Attacks, Volcano and Dante's Peak, films with remarkably similar premises coming from different studios that I guess were born from similar directives and just so happened to release in the same year. And I think it really says something about Sean Connery's enduring star appeal right off the bat that at nearly 70 years old, he's still leading films like this, and he's believable as a romantic lead with a much, much younger woman. Well, actually, you know what, we'll get into believability later, but first off, the plot. The film opens with a face-unseen thief thieving a priceless painting from a high-rise building. Catherine Zeta-Jones is Virginia Baker, an investigator working for Waverly Insurance, and she immediately fingers Sean Connery's Robert McDougal, otherwise known as Mac, as the culprit. She is quickly sanctioned to travel to London to personally investigate the suspect, but the cat and mouse game very quickly escalates as Mac confronts Virginia but ends up recruiting her to help him steal a gaudy but nonetheless very expensive Chinese mask. The rest of the film follows them training, developing a romantic entanglement, and ultimately ending up in Kuala Lumpur on December 31st, 1999 to perform an even bigger heist. The film is directed by John A. Meal, not a household behind-the-scenes name, but a director that I am somewhat familiar with. He directed the Sigourney Weaver Holly Hunter Silence of the Lambs knockoff, aptly titled Copycat, a film that I must have seen about 5 or 6 times. I really like that film, and well, he also directed The Core, which is one of the first experiences I can remember of actively hating a film pretty much as soon as I left the cinema. Just while we're talking about the crew, I was pleasantly surprised to see a couple of Bond alumni names in the credits. Editor Terry Rawlings also cooked GoldenEye, and cinematographer Phil Mayhew worked on that film too, as well as Casino Royale, and indeed, I think that Entrapment looks really great. It's sleek, stylish, sexy, it's a glow-popping story where the locations are used to great effect, especially during the third act, where the, at that time, world's tallest building, the Petronas Towers, play a crucial role. Lord knows my palms were sweating more than Ian Fleming's James Bond during some of that stuff. But my point being that the production values here are really top-notch. I think the heist sequences in particular are really well put together. They look absolutely great, and as if it wasn't enough that I occasionally thought I was watching the Thomas Crown Affair, Ving Rhames turns up with bags of heist gear at a point, and I'm just ready for Tom Cruise to pop up and start recruiting Connery and Zeta-Jones into the IMF, and then just when I get over the feeling that I'm watching a Mission Impossible sequel, this guy turns up as a worker in one of the places that the characters are looking to heist. It's like they're just trying to confuse me at this point. This is my first time watching the film. I didn't know much about the plot beforehand, but even I knew of, well, I guess it is the film's most iconic sequence, isn't it? The one where Zeta-Jones must navigate her way around some tripwires, and then there's also a sequence where she's training for that job. As for why these sequences are so memorable, I couldn't possibly begin to assume. I think one of the most talked about aspects of the film is probably the romance between Connery and Zeta-Jones. Much like in the Thomas Crown Affair, the film is very much dependent on the bristling romantic chemistry between its two leads. But, alright, the elephant in the room. Sean Connery was nearly 70 years old when they were filming this, and Catherine Zeta-Jones was not even 30 yet. She's young enough to be his granddaughter, and how much that bothers you will greatly affect your viewing experience, I think. And hey, the filmmakers were clearly very aware of this, potential subject matter. This is the director addressing the age gap in the film's audio commentary.
This issue of age is quite interesting. A number of reviews barked on about the age difference between these two, ignoring the fact that this was a movie that didn't pretend there wasn't an age difference. It was a movie that celebrated it, rather like My Fair Lady with Rex Harrison and Audrey Hepburn, which I presume the critics would now lacerate as well because of the age difference. This movie's about longing, about learning, each character from the other. It's not about any of that sleazy stuff, really.
And yes, to the film's credit, Connery's characterization is such that he never comes across as a sleazy older man, I don't think. It's not like he's bashing his head in with a frying pan like a Tex Avery cartoon because of this, sexy 20-something and a bubble butt sliding around on the floor of his Scottish castle. Or maybe I'm reading this wrong and he's actually just super pleased at the saving he's going to be making on floor polisher. I wonder if I can convince her to do my kitchen floor next. Virginia is much more forward than Mac is when it comes to the romance, which is clearly calculated on the filmmaker's part. Mac remains stoic, almost reluctant when it comes to his attraction to Virginia because, well, yes, if he were licking his lips at her from the start, the audience may well just think of him as a bit of a dirty old man. While this is all well and good, given the actors that they've cast, I can't help but feel that the film is actually missing a bit of a sense of romantic frisson that it kinda needs. I mean, don't get me wrong, I do think that these two actors have a good deal of chemistry together, but Connery needs to play up this borderline reluctance for a good chunk of the film, so it feels deliberately held back and constrained, and for a film like this, I need a Brosnan-Russo level of chemistry. Heck, Cary Grant, Grace Kelly had a 25-year age gap between them in To Catch a Thief, and I feel like they still maintained a really sizzling rapport throughout that film. I just don't find myself taking much joy in the romance in Entrapment, which is a shame, again, particularly because my headspace is in the Thomas Crown affair, and that is a film that I've cited on this channel time and time again as an example of just phenomenal chemistry between the two leads. That is a horny film, and those two actors work so well together. It is a film that largely excels on the basis of its romantic chemistry between its two leads, and I think that Entrapment probably needed that too, but they're just so understandably self-conscious about the age difference that perhaps that is detrimental to the material. That being said, Connery is always an absolute delight to watch. I think he's really great in this film, and I can say the same for Zeta-Jones too. I think she's really good at the duality that she has to portray here, and I think that the pair bounce off each other very well. They have some really nice dialogue, and some of my favourite scenes are just when it's the two of them in the castle bouncing off one another. I also think the action is quite solid throughout. The heist scenes, as I say, are really fun and inventive. There are some nice twists and turns throughout. I did feel like the film had a certain choppiness to it in the first act or so. It feels like it was edited quite aggressively to reduce the amount of setup, but it felt a little too truncated in places to me. There are some very quick developments in that opening 20 minutes or so, and I've even found myself going back and immediately rewatching one particular scene just to make sure I was following what was going on. It felt a little too speedy for me. That's just my reading of the opening anyway. I don't know if there was an awful lot of material deleted. It might well have been scripted this way. It's just kind of how I came out of it feeling. But yeah, I feel like somewhere there was a directive made to, expedite the setup and get to the meat of the story quicker, which I don't think is necessarily a bad impulse. I could have just done with a bit more time of getting to know Zeta-Jones' character before she becomes involved with Mac and makes certain choices that she makes. I also think the whole Millennium Countdown element of the film is a little overblown. I mean, yeah, I guess it kind of factors into the plot at the end, but early on, whenever they have text coming up to say locations and whatnot, they'll also include this little countdown to the millennium, which I initially thought was a little bit confusing, but hey, I guess this means that Entrapment is a Christmas film?
Merry Christmas.
I mean, it begins a matter of weeks before the turn of the new millennium. There are Christmas trees up in certain scenes. I feel slightly sorry for all of the characters in this thing who are having to work and travel so much over the festive period, particularly when it comes to New Year's Eve of 1999. I'd have been pissed off if I was having to sit around in some CCTV room during the countdown to the millennium, but oh hey, look, it's David Yip from A View to a Kill here in a small role. And just while we're on the subject of Bond, I did like this little Easter egg at the very start of the film as the thief acquires a 4-digit passcode. Number 1007, eh? I guess it's up to the viewer as to how you want to interpret the number 1 element of that code, but it is a very deliberate reference. The director mentions it in his audio commentary.
Yes, you did actually see 007, but it's probably about half a second. We put it in as a little gag.
Entrapment made more money at the box office when compared with the Thomas Crown affair that same year, though in a similar situation to Volcano and Dante's Peak, the Pierce Brosnan starring version of the similar premise was the better reviewed film. Poor Brosnan, he has all of these similar but inferior films coming out alongside his own, stealing his box office thunder. If I had to recommend just one of these two films to someone, it would be the Thomas Crown affair. I think it's a much more successful romantic heist caper, but I did find a lot to enjoy in Entrapment. It's a nicely stylish film featuring a couple of great movie stars in the lead roles, and if you enjoy these kinds of films like I do, I imagine you'll find enough to enjoy in Entrapment to make it a wholly worthwhile viewing experience. I don't think this is necessarily considered some underrated classic, but it was a fun Friday night movie all the same, and I'm glad that I finally had an excuse to get around to seeing it. Funnily enough, despite only getting around to seeing the film now, I feel very overly acquainted with the film's poster for some reason. This is a total aside, but there was a video rental shop near my dad's house, which is where we used to go. It wasn't a Blockbuster. I might have even been some independent thing, I don't really know, but we used to go there to rent VHSs and stuff, and I remember building up to the release of, I guess this was coming out on VHS or something, in like the year 2000 it must have been. I remember them having a big poster in the window, the Sean Connery, Catherine Zeta-Jones poster. And not too long after that, the rental place closed down, and the shop was just derelict for a good few years. No one seemed to want to buy it, but all these posters were still in the window, and we would drive past it all the time, and there was that Entrapment poster just becoming more and more faded over the years, the sunlight just, draining it of its red. So it's nice to actually see the film and have a bit more of a positive association with the title. Just some aging, sun-damaged poster in a shut-down shop window. Anyway, please do let me know your thoughts on Entrapment in the comment section below. Also, please do subscribe to this channel if you've not already, and click the Mrs. Bell notification button to stay updated on future video uploads. And with all that being said, and until next time, high-end robbery fans, so long for now.